Hello, this is Don,
And this is Gina with Focused Healthy Family.
and this week we're sharing with you some of the best of 2023 from the Focused Healthy Family podcast.
Each day this week, we'll rebroadcast one of our favorite episodes over this past year. So be sure to tune in every day.
And also join us in 2024.
So have a happy holidays, and we'll see you in the new year.
Veronica is 15 years old. She's living with her father. She's thinking about the normal things high school kids think about. Boom. Her life just changed. Her father goes into jail and she is now alone and she's now placed in foster care. At 15 years old, she's only got a few ways that she could get out of foster care. First one is for the agencies to find a relative that she could go live with. So the foster care agency does their work. Unfortunately, they only find one relative of her father, an uncle, and he died 3 years ago. At this point, at 15 years old, that means she's pretty much guaranteed to stay in foster care because the adoption rate for kids at 15 years old is about 1%. And at 18 years old, she'll end up on the street. She'll age out of the foster care system. 80% of foster kids who age out end up becoming homeless, going to prison, turning to crime to get money for food and shelter, or she could become a sex trafficking victim as little as 6 hours from the time she leaves her foster home. Her only hope is if someone could find her mother, who lives in Mexico now. The agency, desperate, comes to my organization, Forever Homes for Foster Kids, and they ask me to find her mother. And we do so. We find her mother in 3 weeks. And we also find a grandmother, some aunts. And during that time, the agency finds out that she has 2 aunts living in Los Angeles. So guess where Veronica is now? That's right. She's living in LA. She's with her aunts. She's back in school, back on track, and back living a normal life. That's what I do every day, every week, every year.
Well, hello, this is Don
And this is Gina
with Focused Healthy Family. And today we're talking with Richard Villasana. And before we get into this conversation, though, we want to take just a few minutes for our sponsor. Hey guys, it's Don here from Focused Healthy Family. And instead of our sponsor today, I wanted to take a few minutes to talk about the workshop we're doing based on this book. And we talk a lot about the book. We've talked about it in our podcast, How to Talk So Kids Will Listen and Listen So Kids Will Talk by Adele Faber and Elaine Majlis. And what we were so impressed with this that we decided to do the training the training for it and begin doing workshops on it. We've been doing them now over the last couple of years and have just been amazed by the changes that we have seen happen to parents who are dealing with kids and watching it changing how they communicate with their child, but also how it changes behavior and it changes anxiety. It brings anxiety down in the house. And like I said, I've had an added bonus to it is I use the same material, the same stuff that's in here for my adult world with my profession, because the concepts in this book, they give you real practical steps you can take to change how you communicate and make a difference between having a 15-minute conversation or a 1-hour battle. They tell you in here how to do that in many different ways. And so we do workshops. Uh, it's a 6-week workshop. It's a 2-hour a day workshop. But what we did is we split it into 2 days, 1 hour each day. We do it at noon Eastern time. And we have had people all over the world that have come onto the class, and really neat stuff. And I'm going to play for you uh, one of the parents' testimonies on what they thought of the class. So listen and see what they said. So Starting January 9th, 2024, we're doing our next series of 6-week classes, and they're at noon on Tuesdays and Thursdays, each week for 6 weeks. And you're going to gain a lot of different skills that are very important. Plus, you'll have the opportunity to have other parents and listen to how they deal with things and what's going on for them, and literally working through examples, role playing, um, learning some good content to the book, and just having a good time too at the same time. We have a lot of fun while we do them. I hope that you can join us for this workshop. Again, it's all virtual via Zoom, and it's 6 weeks starting January 9th. You can find out more information by going to focusedhealthyfamily.com/workshops, where you're going to find out all about this wonderful workshop on how to talk to kids who listen and listen so kids will talk. Hope you join us again. focusedhealthyfamily.com/workshops. Thanks. And we're back. And again, today we're talking with Richard Villasana. And Richard is the founder of the nonprofit organization called Forever Homes for Foster Kids. It is a leading international authority on immigration issues and foster families. Richard is also the author of the book Do No Harm, about families separated at the Mexico-US border, the government's failing reunification efforts, and foster care system in crisis. So, Richard, welcome.
Thank you for having me.
So glad you're here. And that story you told, I got goosebumps.
Oh my gosh, yes.
You know, hearing that and just how impactful that is. You know, I didn't know the statistic was that high, that 80% of kids who age out wind up on the streets.
It's a terrible statistic, and here's the problem. Those numbers haven't changed.
Mm.
This information has come out, and foster care is one of those few industries where it's not adapting. It's not moving forward. And there may be some incremental changes, but we're not talking about anything that moves the needle from 80% to 70 or 60%. We're still staying about 80%. So this is an industry in crisis right now.
Well, I was kind of, before we get to that question, I'm kind of curious as to what's causing it to just stalemate like that. What is there something that's causes the cogs to stop?
There are three things that are causing this particular problem. Number one is budget. States are constantly tweaking and changing the budgets. Anytime there's a problem with the state taxes, the first thing that gets hit is welfare. And a lot of people think, well, that's people who are trying to cheat the system. These are people who are undeserving. What they're not thinking about is that these are children who are being directly affected by these budget changes. You don't have enough money for caseworkers, then you don't have enough people who are able to protect these children, to look out for their best interest. So state budget is probably the biggest problem that foster kids face, because there's not enough money being put out there to give them the services that when a state takes and removes a child from a family and puts them into foster care, the state now has accepted responsibility. And the states in this country are doing a miserable job of taking care of our children. So that's number one. Number two, because of that budget problem, we don't have enough caseworkers. The caseworkers are overwhelmed. And in my book, Do No Harm, I talk about this, that there was a case for one caseworker who had 150 cases. Just think about that number. That's an amazing number and completely impossible for any human being to handle.
Mm-hmm.
And many of these social workers are handling cases in the 40s, 50s, 60s. So there's massive burnout. Mm-hmm. And so you have turnover rates of up to 70%. And that leads us to the other problem. Because we don't have enough caseworkers, we don't have enough people who are able to properly vet foster parents, help foster parents, work with the adoptive parents, ensure that these children are kept safe month after month. And so what happens is that the activities that these agencies should be engaging in, they're not being done. Kids are spending years in the foster care system, and then they're aging out. And at that point, we had that terrible, terrible number of 80%.
Wow. So before we get into more details like that, I just want to find out, how did you get into working, with foster kids?
So there's actually two backstories to this. The first one was that I worked with a mentor. I was doing international marketing. So I have been involved in doing international marketing for nearly the same amount of time, 30 years in Latin America. I was very lucky to meet this gentleman who was in who's who of at least half a dozen countries, who did work on behalf of the Department of Defense, foreign governments, US government, the Fortune 500, doing purchases throughout Latin America. And he took me under his wing and was my mentor. And so I have worked with almost every country in Latin America. And during that time, he found that I had a knack of finding officials. And for me, the information was there, it was pretty obvious, but not to a lot of people. And so I'd find these key individuals. And then later, we had this one moment that really impacted my life and changed the course of what I was going to be doing. And that was we were working together in an office, and his name was Antoine, my mentor. And he came to my desk and he says, "Richard, I want you to find this gentleman, Bob Johnson. And he's with the Department of Commerce, and he's in Washington, D.C. That's all I have. Get me a phone number, do your best." Now, I gotta let you know, this is pre-Google. So
Okay.
there was no search engine.
Rolodex time.
Rolodex time, yes. That ancient device that, So later that day, I come to his desk and I drop a piece of paper off, and he says, "What's this?" "That's the phone number." "What phone number?" I said, "The phone number you wanted me to get for, Mr. Johnson." And he looks at his watch. He said, "I asked for this 5 minutes ago." I'm thinking, oh, he's upset that it took so long. And I don't realize he's just flipping out because it's 5 minutes. And I'm thinking, job done. I'm going back to my desk. I've got work to do. And I'm walking away. He says, "You're not leaving until you explain this to me. How did you do this?" So I said, "Well, that's easy. I called Betty over at the Economic Development Center, and she got me to John over in DC. And I talked to John for a minute. He gave me to Suzanne, and Suzanne gave me the number." And I'm thinking, okay, I've explained. I've got work to do. I'm ready to go. And he says, "Nobody does this." I said, "I do this all the time." And again, I'm thinking, I've got work. And he says, "You're not listening to me." And I had worked with Antoine enough to know that when he said that, I was missing a really important life lesson. So I kind of chilled, got in front of his desk, relaxed, and said, "Okay, what am I missing?" He said, "You know my background. You know all the people I have met. When I tell you that in all my travels, I have never met someone who can do what you just did, that means something." I said, "Well, I do it all the time." He said, "It doesn't matter. There is value in what you do." And that was the first time someone had pointed this out to me, and also someone that I respected. So I was listening. And that made me realize I had this gift of finding people, something that I thought was so simple, but that he pointed out was something very important and very valuable in the right situation. And that's what got me started, because what happened is some of those people I had helped before professionally started calling me up and saying, "I have this brother. I haven't seen him in 10 years. What do you think?" And I would find them. And I would have people say, "I went to college with this person. Do you think you could find them?" And I found them. And then all of a sudden, I started getting phone calls from foster care agencies saying, "We've heard about you, and we have a child who's in foster care, and they have a relative in Mexico or Central America. Can you help us?" And I'm like, "Sure." And that's how this started. It was not like I had some really great plan. I sat down with a career counselor at college. They said, "Listen, you can be an accountant, attorney, and oh, by the way, you can be an investigator internationally." Didn't work out that way, but that's essentially what happened.
Okay. So you started doing it just sort of on the side before you grew the organization, it sounds like.
Absolutely. It was not like this was my full-time day job. This was just something I would get these cases and I would handle them. And it just kind of grew from there organically.
And so tell us more about your organization and how they help foster children.
So the organization is Forever Homes for Foster Kids. And this has been ongoing and kind of growing for 30 years. And what we do is, what happens with a child is when they come into foster care, just like for Veronica, they come in and maybe there's an aunt or uncle or someone nearby and they know about the problem, why the child got pulled out of the family in the first place. Maybe it was because of abuse, maybe because of neglect, but there may be a relative nearby. And so the foster care agency can put the child with that relative. That's great. And it does happen, but not all the time. So sometimes the parents are living apart from their family who is in another city or another state, and they have to reach out to them. And this is where foster parents are very important. So the child is in foster care right now. We're trying to get that list. And this is what we call family finding. It's a process. And the process is really simple. You make that list of relatives, grandma, all the aunts, cousins, and then you locate them and you contact them. And when you contact them, the idea is hopefully one of those people will step up and say, I'll take the child. And if you do this with enough relatives, hopefully dozens, someone does step up often and says, I'll take in the child. And that gets the child out of the foster system that we all have heard about and into what we call kinship care. They're being cared for by their family. And it's a much healthier environment because they're familiar with the family, even if they haven't met them. I have talked to foster kids who said, I would have loved if my relative had took me in, even if I haven't seen them ever, because they're still family. And so the same thing happens with us. The difference between my organization and the search that these foster care agencies do, just like in Veronica's case, is that sometimes they can't find the relatives. So if we have a child who is Latino, for the most part, because they would have relatives that are living in Mexico, Central America, South America, instead of Europe or in Asia, then those agencies are struggling. They don't speak Spanish. They don't read Spanish. They don't know who do I call? How do I dial the number? How do I talk to someone in another country? And so they come to my organization because that's what we do. We have found relatives throughout Latin America, Brazil, Argentina, Dominican Republic, Mexico, too many cases to count, Central America. That's what we specialize in. We'll find those relatives, get their contact information, give it to the agencies so they can pick the phone up, make that connection, and move the child and get the child out of foster care. Now, I'm going to anticipate the next question, which is, Richard, does that mean the child is shipped off to Guatemala? No. Almost every family member in Latin America knows of someone who's already living in the United States. It could be an aunt, just like in Veronica's case. Could be a great uncle, could be a grandparent, could be an older sister. And they will gladly tell the foster care agencies so that in Veronica's case, she didn't go to Mexico, she went to LA. And that's what happens in these cases, because most of these kids, when I say Latino, that doesn't mean immigrant. It means a US born child of a US born parent. And so those are the majority of kids who are in the foster care system, 90,000 of them.
How would what would you say is the success rate when you do find a family member? Do they some of them still turn them back, or return?
Or say they can't. You can't find somebody.
So our success rate is about 85%.
That's good.
Which is actually it's a very high number. The success rate of agencies in the US using US databases is roughly 85%.
Okay.
So, and we're doing this internationally. in places where there is no master database, there is no US search. You don't pay $2 and be able to find 5 people. Doesn't work that way in these countries.
Right.
It sounds like you have to really know some connections in those countries to be able to do that. Make those somebody in government or in other agencies down in Latin America to make those connections better.
It really depends upon the case. We do everything, and that is part of our success, is that we are very open. So we don't have one size fits all, and that's the problem we have up here. The only option for many agencies is to pick the phone up and maybe call a consulate. But those people are busy. Number one, they have jobs, they have work, and their work is not to go find people living in their country. That's not their job. So they're calling, I could say, the right people, but those people are not often in a position to help. And so that's all they have. We don't have those limitations. And this kind of leads into the work that we've been doing presently for the federal government. You mentioned about the children who were separated at the US-Mexico border in 2017 and 18. And just to kind of refresh this, more than 5,000 families that came to the US border in 2017 up to 2020 had their children separated from the parents. And this wasn't a separation where they thought, well, maybe this adult isn't the father of the child. No, they knew they were the father of the child. They had papers identifying that here's the birth certificate, here's my birth certificate, here's our legal document showing that we are a family, but they got separated under a policy called zero tolerance that got initiated in 2017. So about 2020, the US government had been doing some work, and they had had some success finding some of these families out of this 5,000 plus number that we're talking about. But they weren't finding everyone, and they were getting a little stuck. And they had some cases that they had worked and they had gone nowhere, despite best efforts. And at that time, I got a call. And I got invited in because of my expertise to help on behalf of the federal government to help them locate these families. And that's what I've been doing for the last year and a half, is working throughout Central and South America, finding families that other agencies simply could not find. And we have been closing, again, 85 to 90% of those cases. We have been finding those relatives, and now those parents are being brought, and the reunification process is moving forward.
It's wonderful.
That
That
is.
is just wonderful, because that broke my heart, when I heard that story, and it just, parents being separated from their children, just, the best place for a child is with its parents, and it's just crazy that happened. And so I just want to thank you for all the work you've done with that and to help with that, because that is important.
Yeah, I don't think any parent out there didn't have their heart ripped apart listening to that kind of information and finding out that was happening, and to watch it happen. A lot of times they were showing it, maybe if you could, I'd like to know, we've talked about some of the challenges so far that foster kids run into, but kind of give us an idea of what their life is like, and maybe even their daily life, and then what challenges that they face. Like I said, we've talked about some of them now, but I'd like to expand on that a little bit.
So let's talk about an environment that people are really familiar with, school.
Okay.
So you have a child who's in foster care. Now, many of these kids, they don't have a full wardrobe. They may have one pair of pants. They may have one pair of shoes. And it all depends upon the foster parents. Some foster parents, just like all parents, some are great parents. Some are the kind of parents that you wish you had. Some are the kind of parents that you're very happy you don't have. And the same thing happens in foster care. And so kids may or may not have new clothes. They may have hand-me-downs. And so that can be a problem, because let's face it, there are a lot of kids who are thinking materialistically. They're thinking about having the latest style, the newest shoes, the right jeans. Well, that doesn't work real well with foster kids, because they're just happy to have clothes. And a lot of times when they're moving, and foster kids move about twice a year. So think about that. Everything you've known changes. The house layout, the rules of the house, what you can eat. You could be in a house where maybe you were able to have French toast and you had syrup and you had powdered sugar. And now you go to a home and they say, well, you can have syrup or powdered sugar, but you can't have both. Try explaining that to a 5-year-old child. Why can't I see the powdered sugar in front of me? Why can't I have that? Just the rules of the house. So we have ideology that can be different, religious views that can be different, that can completely mess up a child.
Yeah.
One minute I'm supposed to like God, the next minute I'm not supposed to like God, or maybe I'm not supposed to like him a particular way. All this is impacting the child, not to mention every time they move, that child is thinking, they didn't love me. What did I do wrong? How come they didn't want to keep me? What's wrong with me? So this trauma just keeps growing. Every time something bad happens, it's another mark that's in their brain. They're thinking, it's me. That's another, I did something wrong again, but no one's telling me what I did wrong. What's happening? What can I do? So they feel helpless, they feel unstable, they feel unloved. And now they're going to go to school. And they're going to go to school with adults who are teachers who may have prejudices, biases. Little Johnny, you didn't take a bath today. And they have no problem saying this in front of the classroom. They have no problem embarrassing the child in front of their peers. And if it's not the teachers doing this, then the students will be happy to do that for them and to embarrass that child.
Right.
That is a snapshot of what a foster child could be going through
Sure.
Wow.
every day.
That's powerful. As I moved around as a kid because my dad changed jobs, so a couple different places we moved into a different state, and it was challenging enough starting a new school. But I had the same parents, you know. I had that consistency, and so I'm just imagining that whole situation at school is so magnified, and just that, like you talk about, not knowing what the rules are, what they're allowed to eat, and just all those little things, and how unsettling that is, how it affects their self-esteem, and not having, you know, I had that base of a good family. So even though the one time we moved, it was a struggle in the new school, you know, I still had that base and those parents to go to. So yeah, I can only imagine that challenge for those kids.
Well, and let me share this too. This is a story that's in my book. And this was given to me by a foster child. And he said, I had a foster brother. So they were in the same home. And a week before school started, their foster mom took both of them down to the school, had them in the principal's office. And the principal said, look, I know you're foster kids. If there's any problems, I'm coming after you two because you're probably starting it.
Oh my gosh.
And this foster kid wrote, he said, that's my introduction. I got betrayed by my foster mom, who clearly didn't trust us. I got betrayed by my administrator, who thought we were criminals because we were foster kids. And we hadn't even started our first day of school. These are some of the abuses that foster kids have to put up with, and they don't have someone standing up for them like kids do when they have a father who calls the school board or a mother who calls them out or goes to social media. These kids often don't have that person protecting them.
Yeah,
Well, and I can imagine too that you talk about the fact of not enough workers, caseworkers and all, that the quality of the parents then can be, you know, it's tough to get quality parents because you don't have anybody like, you know, vetting them, I guess, you know, it seems like that's part of the problem.
So you're absolutely right. What happens is this: when you have caseworkers who are so overburdened and overworked, they have to cut corners. And caseworkers have come out and said, look, I have a choice. I could go visit the children that I have under my care, or I could do the paperwork, because if I don't do the paperwork, I get fired. So I have to make a choice. Which kids do I not check on this month to ensure that they are safe and that they're getting fed and that they're in a safe environment? So that drops off. Then that also impacts the vetting process. So maybe they have someone who's in the system, but they're not top choice. And they can't check to make sure that that child's safe when they give them to someone who's not top choice. And the foster care system does have people who present well, look great, and who are pedophiles. That's a fact. And these people are in the system. And what happens is these caseworkers feel so pressured to find a home for a foster child, because some of these kids right now, today, are going to sleep in a motel room. They're going to sleep on the floor of an office at their foster care agency. They're going to sleep on the break room floor. They're going to sleep on a cot somewhere. Some kids do this for weeks. And that's the situation. So the caseworker is looking at this and saying, wow, Bobby has been in the break room now for a week. I got to find some place. Okay, there's Mr. Johnson. You know, we haven't really checked up on him lately, but he's available. Let's put Johnny with, Mr. Johnson. Well, guess what? That might be a problem. And what's happened in the most extreme cases is that they have put people with known offenders. They know these people had allegations of sexual or physical abuse, and yet they still placed the child with them. So this is a situation where it's a rock in a hard place, and they've got a rock coming on top of their head. It is almost a no-win situation.
Right. Yeah, there's not enough money, and then it's hard. They can't really do the job effectively that they need to do. I work in healthcare, and I know how challenging the regulations are for me to do my job as an occupational therapist in a nursing home. And this is even more complicated. You're talking about kids and their lives and where they live. And
This is heart-wrenching.
it is.
So I
We're going
guess
to adopt 5 children.
yes.
tomorrow.
So I guess somehow looking on a lighter side, are there solutions out there?
Yes.
And I mean, you're one of the solutions I see, but are there other solutions out there, and what are they?
There are definitely solutions. And yes, you're right. We do need to talk about hope at this point, because you can't have a situation like this and overlook the good. And there's a lot of good. So number one, and I highlight this again in my book, that we need to give the thanks to the foster parents, the ones who come in with the right heart, the good heart, who open their home to this child they've never met, who may have trauma and stress and other mental issues just from everything that's happened to them. And they bring them into their home and treat them just as any other child. That's number one. And then we have the people who are people like judges. The judges can be very influential, because the judges can force agencies to do what need to get done. That happened to a case we had in Florida where the judge told them, you're not doing this, working hard enough. And the agency was thinking, we don't know how to work harder on this case because the relatives were living in Latin America. But they found us. It forced them to find us, and then we solved the problem for them. So there are solutions out there. And the biggest solution for foster care, aside from budget, is family finding. There are agencies across the country. This is a concept that's been around for almost 30 years. It's a simple concept. Remember, we make the list of relatives, we track them down, we contact them and say, hey, you have a child in foster care. Would you like to help? Pretty straightforward. If the agencies do it. But a lot of agencies don't do that. Or what they'll do is they'll find 10 relatives, and because they want to cut back on budget and costs, they'll say, you know what, only send one letter out. Well, what happens to that relative is the one relative who's having a bad day. They got laid off. Something has happened to them. They physically can't handle it. They had COVID. Now that means that child stays in foster care. It doesn't have to be that way. So the expansion of family finding, looking for relatives, tracking them down, notifying each and every one of them could definitely lower the number, because we have more than 400,000 children in foster care at any one time. Clearly, family finding works. People will take these kids out of the foster care system into kinship care. It is one of the easiest, cheapest ways to reduce these numbers and to help these kids and get them back to a stable, loving environment. And there are people who right now are doing that. There are caseworkers who are just working themselves to death because they love these kids and they want to do everything they can for them. The foster parents, the adopted parents, and the people who support them, the people who donate to nonprofits like mine, who
Mhm.
help us because we can't do it alone. We need those donations. We need those contributions so that we can go and do this.
Right.
So when you talk about the kinship care, when they're placed with a family, does that become a legal adoption then? Or how do they do they make it permanent somehow as far as legally, like I say, adopting them, or what happens with that?
It's a great question. It's a little expensive, and here's why. So 50%, give or take, of children that go into foster care do go back to their parents.
Mhm.
Maybe the reason they came out is because the parents needed a little extra money. Maybe it's the parents just weren't very good at cooking. They didn't know how to keep house. They didn't really, they didn't know who to go to for medical care.
Mhm.
Maybe it's just simply a matter of education. Now, it could be a matter of maybe we need to take you to some classes so you can learn how to be a better parent, how
Mhm.
to manage your anger, how to redirect your frustration, maybe help you get a job, whatever.
Mhm.
50% or more of the time, the children go back to their parents. But they are with the family, so they're still in that family environment. So again, that's a very healthy situation. Now, for those other kids, what happens is the parental rights get terminated. So they're still with, let's say, grandma.
Mhm.
Maybe grandma now will adopt the child. And a lot of grandparents have adopted their children. As a matter of fact, Simone Biles, our
Mhm.
Olympic star,
Mhm.
she was taken away from her mother along with her siblings, and her grandparents came in and brought them into kinship care, and then she got adopted. And it was because that adoption gave her the family stability that allowed her then to go through life and to ultimately be the greatest gymnast the world has ever seen.
Wow. Yeah.
But that happened because she was able to move into that adoption stage. So there's kinship care, but that doesn't necessarily mean they're adopted.
Right.
They may stay with the grandparent until they age out, and that can happen,
Mhm.
but at least they have the family connection. That's the biggest thing that family finding does. It
Yeah.
gives them that family connection so they know that maybe they can't afford to pay everything. They can't afford to give them a big house or a new car, but they know I can call grandma. Grandma will listen to me. Grandma loves me.
Mhm.
Right.
Yeah,
Yep.
that's. I have a friend who fostered her, I think, sister's kids for a couple years, and I think they're back with the sister now. But yeah, just being with family, like you said, whether they have met these relatives or not, that means something, that it's family. And I just can imagine how much better a situation that is for the kids. Otherwise, like you described, every time they get moved around, why are they moving me? What did I do wrong? And it probably often has nothing to do with the child, but the child doesn't know that, and they make all kinds of assumptions.
Well, before we wrap up, I want, is there any other message that you would like to get out to our audience about what you do and how the foster?
And how people can become involved, and even without becoming a foster parent, what other things, like you talk about, the organizations like yours, they need the financial support to continue this work and to make things happen. So any other things that people can do um, to support foster children in some way?
Absolutely. Nonprofits are there because we realize there are people who are working their work. They have their own families. They want to give, and they just simply can't do the work. And that's what we're here for.
Mhm.
We're here for people. They can support us and know that we're making a difference, that their money is being well spent, and that we are out there doing something. It's just not fluff. We are getting these kids back to their families. These kids are getting out of the system. They are living healthier, safer, better lives now that we've been able to do this. So these are hard results that we're able to do for these families.
Mhm.
So people can find out more about us at Forever Homes for, that's FOR, fosterkids.org. That's our website. They can find us, Forever Homes for Foster Kids, on Facebook. Right now, we've got a post about to kids. We're very much an advocacy group. So we help other organizations.
Mhm.
We help people understand, how can I become a foster parent? How can I become an adoptive parent? We're
Mhm.
constantly giving out this information to help. And finally, the best way for anyone who wants to know about the foster care system, the problems, and the hope,
Mhm.
and how we can turn this around is with my book, Do No Harm. It's on Amazon. They can get the book. The proceeds go to help foster kids. It's all about the children and changing their life for the better.
Wonderful.
Well,
wonderful.
we will remind our audience, we will be putting all that up on the Focused Healthy Family podcast.com website. So they'll have information about the book and about Richard and his organization. So
Is there any last thoughts that you want to say to anybody, to people, to our audience?
Absolutely. Look, there are a lot of problems in foster care, but there are thousands and thousands of adults out there who are working hard, doing it right, doing it well. So yes, they have problems. We have to highlight them, but please do not overlook all the good that these many, many people are doing to help a child in need.
Right, right. Yeah, there's good that's being done, and we just need to put more energy into that good that's being done. And that's why we're doing this whole series on fostering and adoption. We're recording this in advance of it airing, and your book will be out by then. And we look forward to reading it and sharing that link. And so thank you so much, Richard, for being here with us, enlightening us, bringing this issue to the attention of people to be able to get more help.
yeah, thank you, Richard. We really appreciate it.
You're so very welcome.
So that's our podcast for today. We hope you've enjoyed it. We want to hear from you. Please leave us a comment, reach out to us on our Facebook page, our website. You can learn more about Richard and his organization there. You can learn more about Don and I and our coaching program and the work we do with parents and caregivers. If you want to know more about that program, check out focusedhealthyfamily.com. Follow us on Facebook, on Instagram, Gina at Focused Healthy Family, and read my corresponding blogs, all found on Focused Healthy Family. And remember, how you speak to a child shapes their future.